And just like that, we're back to the more traditional vocabulary questions where we just fill in the blank. So this is much more about what, like, in my mind, the vocab questions are going to look like. But yes, we can have those other ones that we saw in number 3. But let's take a look. Same thing. Let's go to the passage first. We've got a lot of words here. Maybe they're getting a little harder, but we want to think about what the passage is saying first. Some people have speculated that 2 helmets with attached horns discovered in Denmark in 1942 belonged to Vikings, but scholars have long been skeptical. Archaeologist Helle Vandekild and colleagues recently provided radiocarbon dates for the helmets, and their findings blank scholars' skepticism. The helmets date to the Nordic Bronze Age, centuries before the Vikings existed. Okay, so we got to follow the logic of this question. This is tricky. So let's try to break the sentence down into a smaller set of ideas here. So they're speculating that the helmets belong to Vikings. But, key word there, scholars have long been skeptical. Okay, so scholars are skeptical. So the first sentence here is saying 2 things, right? There's almost 2 sentences in one where the but is kind of getting us across, right? So 1, helmets from Vikings. Okay, I'm going to just do V. 2, let's see, scholars. All right, well, let's actually simplify it even further. Let's just go with, but helmets not from Vikings, right? That's the idea right here where the but starts. This person, this archaeologist and his colleagues, or her colleagues, recently provided radiocarbon dates for the helmets, and their findings blank the skepticism. So what do? The helmets date to the Nordic Bronze Age, centuries before the Vikings. So the helmets are not from the Vikings. So 3 and 2 go together, right? So we want to say that. We want to say that the skepticism was good. So their findings, I don't know, support the skepticism, right? We want to link sentence 2 and 3. Sentence 2 is we're skeptical of when these things are from. Sentence 3 is saying we should be skeptical. The dating shows that it's not correct. So we want to link these 2 ideas. And I needed to write this out because I can tell as I'm reading this that the challenge here is understanding the structure of the passage. It's not going to be so much about the words. It's much more about understanding the logic and the connectedness of these sentences. And I think that's the main thing I want to get across about these vocab questions, is some of them will involve truly difficult words that you need to study and learn and memorize and all that. But most of the time, when people get these wrong, it's not because they don't know the definitions of the words. It's because they're not paying attention or understanding the complexity of the passage. So if that happens, you've got scrap paper for reading. Even on the digital SAT, you have scrap paper you can write with your hand on the reading section. So use it to kind of get these ideas to be in a simpler form. This is a dumb summary. Now let's see what makes sense here. Well, if I look at just the word support, justify kind of matches. So that's already my go-to here. But let's put it in, let's make sure. Their findings justify the scholar's skepticism. Their findings justify it because their findings were that the helmets were not from the Vikings. So the skepticism, which means uncertainty, I maybe should have clarified that word. Skeptical means uncertain. So that the new dates are justifying that they were right. They were right to be uncertain about that conclusion that the Vikings were, the helmets belonged to the Vikings. So the other choices just don't make a lot of sense. Their findings anticipate scholars' skepticism. Well, anticipate means to kind of like, almost like predict. And so that means that something is happening later. But we've already established that they're skeptical, right? So the findings seem to come after the fact that people were skeptical. So the ordering is not right for A. Inspect doesn't make any sense. Their findings inspect scholars' skepticism. You can inspect the helmets. They're a physical thing. We can somehow measure them in different ways. But we cannot inspect skepticism. That doesn't really make sense. So it means to look at closely, right? So you can't, how do you look at someone's skepticism? And then reveal. This is tricky because, again, it's messing with the timing. It's making us think that we maybe discovered the true date of these helmets first, and then that made people skeptical. But that is not how the passage presents things, right? They're skeptical first, and then we get evidence that their skepticism was justified because their helmets are not the right age. So this, to me, is where we have a hard question. You know, this might be one that you mark for review and come back to, because it's much more about the structure of that passage. And if we misread it, we might get something that's off, not because we misunderstood the choice, but because we misunderstood the question, the passage. So just make sure you're always thinking about that and not just plugging random words into these blanks and trying to just see what sounds best. There's more to this strategy for the vocab than just knowing vocabulary words.